everyone, welcome to Blue Dragon Actual. Today the topic for discussion is APS 7 or how we kind of construct MATs. Now if we are studying actually, then you have heard about this margins for adverse deviation or prudence or provision for adverse deviation, also known as PADs. All these are kind of used interchangeably, and obviously there is a way that we have to kind of calculate the MAT, right? And this is actual practice standard which is issued by Institute of Actuaries of India, which kind of talks volume about that thing. So yeah, so now we'll cover that. But however, before starting, just wanted to mention that like in my last second last to last video, which was related to MBA versus actuary, I asked a question and I never gave an answer to that question, and I was waiting for few of the people to kind of post comments. The question was, what is the difference between a guy who is scoring 95 percentile and a person who is kind of scoring 99 percentile or 100 percentile? And I was surprised that nobody asked that question in the comment section. Maybe probably people are skipping the videos or not watching the videos carefully. I mean that if you want to be a good actuary, that would come in your way if you are kind of skipping question, if you're not not going through the entire thing. I understand the like the length of the videos are long, and that's how it should be. Like in your life, if you want to be a good actuary, you have to read documents after document, pages after pages, and you need to form opinion, and you'd be, as I mentioned in that that presentation, that you have to actually is a person who answers the why. When everyone would not be able to find the answer why, then you are the person that everyone would look up to answer that why. And if you are going to skip through videos like that, I mean, it is not going to help you. Anyways, so I'll give the answer. The answer is a person who is kind of scoring 95 percentile would be a lot more stressed and panicked as compared to a person who is scoring 99 percentile. There would be no difference in knowledge. The only difference lies in stress management, which I kind of mentioned in the MBA slide, that in MBA a person is more better and equipped with how to handle stress as compared to an actuary, because actuaries are good people, like they are people who have kind of got a lot of marks and knowledge, uh, and they have not faced a severe stress in their life. So that's why people who are kind of doing MBA would, because of the nature of the course, they would be put under stress, and that's why they would be better in handling stress. It's not that actually cannot go to that level, they can certainly, but yeah, I mean it would be difficult for them. And for personally, I have not seen very good stress managers in actually. I've worked for around 8 years, but I have always seen the stress, usually the managers have been passed on to the juniors, and nobody kind of absorb the stress. So that's the overall that's the actual answer for that question. So what I'll do today is just to see if someone is kind of watching the entire video, because if you are not, then you are missing out on several things, especially when we are kind of considering the regulations and guidelines. I know these are boring, right? These are difficult to understand. These are written in language, and everyone wants to score marks in the exam. As I mentioned, actually is all people has a image in their mind that actually is all about clearing exam. You become a fellow actually once you clear the the 15 papers, but you earn a lot of respect once you clear problems or solve problems which other fellow actuaries cannot, right? And that you can only do when you understand the regulation guidelines. So if you have 10 scenarios in your head, then only you will be able to debug or kind of solve for the 11th scenario. So that is very important. So from this point onwards, so for every video I'll ask a question, and I'll for that I'll answer in the next video. So today also I'll ask a question, and let's see if people can comment in the comment section, and for the answer would be kind of given in the next video. Okay. So moving on without any wastage of time. So this is regarding actual practice standard APS 7, and this is regarding the calculation of MAT. Now, an appointed actuaries need to carry out investigation, and that person is also need to kind of value liabilities on a regular basis, and the frequency that is usually followed, that has to be followed at least, would be annual basis. On an annual basis, an appointed actually has to kind of value liabilities. Annual valuing liabilities, it expected that appointed actually would incorporate some level of prudence right? And the method that is suggested is gross prospective method of valuation, something that you have studied in City 5. So gross prospective method of valuation. However, the parameters would be chosen by the actuary as he or she deemed appropriate. Right now, the basis of the actuary has to use professional judgment in order to kind of determine the level of MADs. And so the basic criteria for determining MADs would be protection of the policyholder interest, existing policyholder interest, and also the fact that including the policyholder reasonable expectations. So that would mean a range of plausible future scenarios would be constructed, and the actuary would be able to should be able to demonstrate the solvency of the insurer in such situation. And these liabilities are the numbers that will be published and maybe reported in greater detail to the authority or IRDA. So the MADs or the PADs, that has to be kind of that would be a measure of prudence, and that would protect the existing policyholder interest. Now, in if the level of MAD is too high, then it would unnecessarily tie up capital, and that would cause reduction in the return as expected by the shareholder and the policyholder. But if the level of MAD is high, then that would also protect policyholder interest against adverse scenarios. Once again, the actuaries are the appointed actuaries, kind of the person responsible for calculating the MADs in the parameters, and as he is responsible or she is responsible for calculating every other things in the valuation basis. So actuaries are the owner of liabilities, especially in life insurance, general insurance. Actuaries are the owner of liabilities. The asset would be managed by the investment team, but when you talk about actuaries, actuaries are owner of liabilities, and that does not mean actuaries are negative people, right? Liabilities are very difficult to value. That's why actuaries are kind of doing valuing liabilities. Assets, because they're traded in the market, we have like number of times we've gone through the concept of fair valuation. So that's why the price of asset are easy to kind of determine. So coming back to the calculation of MATs, now actuary can establish best estimate assumptions and then add MATs. So MAT act as a cushion against misestimation of the best estimate assumptions. Now, best estimate assumptions should be used when there is a like this method can be used when there is a price to tie up to or a yield to which the parameters can relate it to or other critical statistics in the open market. So basically the fair value concept. So if you have something with which you can relate to, then you can use that as best estimate assumption. Alternatively, the actuary can establish net of MAT assumptions or provide an overall contingency reserve. But whatever method is chosen, the actuary has to kind of justify and quantify the level of MATs present. So here you see there are 2 points that are very important, which one is professional judgment. Like actuary has to apply judgment. Creating or determining MAT involves a lot of judgment, right? And that you can only, like I was mentioning, that you can have that judgment not by clearing papers. It's impossible to have that judgment. You have that judgment after working for years and after reading things and reading documents after documents. Only then you will have that intuition, that judgment, right? And so actually would be required to kind of quantify and justify, and that should ideally be done by a range of adverse scenarios in which the actuary will be able to demonstrate solvency so that the policyholder interest are protected. The actuary might consider the following. First is the actuary might consider rely on the overall MATs rather than particular MAT associated with the parameter, provided it can be established that the impact on the liability because of a coincident occurrence of the adverse situation is insignificant. Like if all the parameters are affected simultaneously, then the increase in liability would not be that significant. However, if all the parameters are simultaneously impacted and increase in liability is significant, then actually cannot use this. Then I actually has to kind of allow for that, right? That then this assumption or consideration would not be valid. The actuary should also consider how the increase in liability is offset by the increase in asset. Now, this would happen in Indian kind of scenario where the valuation of liability is happening. This is an India specific point, because in India the asset and liabilities are not delinked, which we will see in the ALSM regulation. So that's why, because before starting the ALSM regulation, which is the most important regulation for an actuary, we need to cover all of the other topics like the stochastic modeling, the derivatives, right? This ALSM regulation, the guarantees, etc. So all of those topics need to be considered, because all of those topics you have to kind of connect all those dots in the ALSM regulation. Anyways, coming back to the MATS portion. So the actually should consider the how the increase in liabilities is kind of offset by the increase in asset. So this what this means that the discount rate that is used for liabilities would be kind of the yields that is determined by the asset with some adjustment. And that because if the asset if the yields increases, obviously the liability decreases. That means that your asset value increases, liability decreases. However, if the yields decreases or the asset value falls, then the yield will decrease. And so no, the asset yield would have an inverse correlation. So if the yield increases, the price of the asset will decrease, and if the yield decrease, the price of the asset will increase. So that's why there is an inverse relation, and this same yield is kind of used for in kind of discounting the liability. So if the yield is higher, then because you are discounting, your denominator is higher because you are discounting with a higher yield, then the liability value will fall, right? And if the yield is lower, which would mean that because with the yield and asset price, there is an inverse relationship. If the yield is lower, then that would mean the asset price is higher. And if the yield is lower, that would also mean it is discounted by a lower denominator. So the liability would also be higher. So the movement in the asset and liability will be similar, right? And that is basically the concept of immunization. If you have asset and liability which are matched, then slight change in yield would not cause a material change in the movement of asset and liability. But rarely in insurance scenario you'll see something to be matched, because we have seen mismatching leads to profit, right? So there is a deliberate mismatching that is going on so that it can result in profit. So the actuary has to consider how the increase in liabilities comes kind of offset by the increase in asset, increase in the value of asset. Now because both are increasing, right, both are moving in the same direction, because both are linked. However, in IFRS 17, Solvency 2, these are kind of delinked. Asset will be treated as a separate security, liability will be treated as a separate security. And because of this delink, this sort of this point would not be that relevant there. Now, the actuary also has to consider the management action that is available. Management action means changing the asset mix, or where there is any discretion involved, like reducing or eliminating the bonuses, changing the charges, mortality charges, was discretion to do so. So that would also need to be allowed for the protection provided by the reinsurance, and only in most adverse situation where the shareholder need to pump in money, or there is closure of new business, right? And that is also an adverse scenario situation that the management can do. Management can close the new business, so that there will be considerable reduction in the expense and hence the reserve. So only in those adverse scenario, extreme situations, a portion of the free capital of the participating fund, which is 10% of the participating fund, or the free capital of the participating fund, can be used to provide additional protection. Now, here is the question. The question is, when we say 10% of the free capital in participating fund, what does free capital mean there? So that is the question. And if you know the answer to the, because if you have gone through all my videos, you'll be very easily able to answer this question. So write your answer in the comment section, and there is, I mean, you can be wrong, you can be right. It's important to try, and I will give the answer in the next video. Okay, now moving on. The next would be construction of scenarios, right? Now we have seen what is the consideration for MADs, but now we are moving on to the construction of scenarios. The construction of scenarios is that you must consider the conditions or the combination of conditions that would kind of result in threatening the policy life of its ability to secure the interest of the policyholder. Upon actually should also consider how the increase or decrease in the asset is kind of threaten the policyholders, or the life of his ability to kind of securing the policyholder interest. More consider the interaction between asset and liabilities more carefully, and actually should not be influenced by the personal opinion held, and must consider range of all possible future and must consider the range of all possible future scenarios, and must also consider the policyholder acting rationally in order to maximize their own interest. So suppose if there is a guaranteed annuity option and the current interest rate is below the guaranteed annuity, they actually must consider that the more policyholders is going to exercise that option, right? So that in that way they will be selecting against the company, and that the MAT should allow for that. So that is something that actually has to kind of consider for. Now, in determining, the actuary must consider in determining the MATs, the actuary must consider the past experience of the company, and also one of the important thing is related to investment. So for long duration guarantees or the guarantees related to long duration contracts for the investment of the expected premium or the investment of the premium or the reinvestment of the investment income, they actually must consider the investment environment of the situation outside India, outside the jurisdiction of India, and make necessary adjustments for modality or mobility options and investment guarantee. So for modality mobility options, they actually must consider both the deterioration of the experience as well as the improvement in the experience. For assurance, the opponent actually should consider whether the increase of risk because of say things like HIV or AIDS would be kind of offset by the increase in the by the level of mats that has been allowed for. And for the annuities, they actually should consider whether the improvement in mortality would and the improvement in mortality would be kind of taken care of by the increase in, or by the mats that has been allowed for. And the actually should be the risk of the actually should consider the risk of anti-selection when someone is exercising the model option to kind of increase the cover or to increase the term of the policy. So that is the mortality option, right? And the actually should also consider the company selecting against the company like selective withdrawal and the impact it would have on mortality. And for investment guarantee, the actuary should consider any explicit or implicit guarantee and should ensure that the level of MAT is sufficient to allow for this guarantee is biting under adverse situation. Now we'll come to the scenarios. So the first would be interest rates. Now these are the when we come to scenarios, these would be the assumptions. And we know that when there is a change in the assumptions are the most important thing for basis. So assumptions, if your assumption is lower than actual, then you would be making profit. And if your assumption is better than higher than actual, then you would be making loss. So this is a concept that we'll be seeing more clearly in analysis of surplus. But I mean, that portion should be clear that if you suppose you are expecting 10 deaths and there is exactly 10 deaths, you are not making any profit or loss because you are keeping the reserve for 10 deaths only. You have paid out your reserve. So that's why there is no profit or loss. However, if you are expecting 10 deaths and there are 9 deaths, then your actual is lower than assurance. Actual is lower than expected, and for an assurance product, you'll be making profit, right? So you'd be releasing your reserve, but that release would be lower than the death claims that you would be paying. So that's why there would be a profit. Now that's why in constructing the adverse scenario, we are going to shock or we are going to see the adverse situation impact on the assumptions, right? First is the interest rate. As I mentioned, for Indian scenario, the interest rate would be determined by the yields that the assets are generating. So in this case, the shock that would be applied would be 10% of increase or decrease, because interest rate can impact in either way, right? Increase or decrease. So that's why increase or decrease. 10% increase or decrease in the gross best estimate, a current best estimate assumption of which is given by the gross redemption yield. GRY, gross redemption yield, is basically the yield that equates the redemption value on the coupon payment with the current value, current price that is paid for the bond. So that means it is the return that is kind of given by the bond. So anyways, coming back to the topic, so it would be 10% of the current best estimate assumption of the gross redemption yield of a for the next 5 years of a 10-year blitz. Blitz is the treasury or the bond that is kind of issued by the government. And further there would be a 10% increase or decrease for the next 5 years. Right. So now then moving on to the mortality. So more for mortality, there will be two types of assumptions as assurance and annuities. For assurance, there will be 10% increase in the best estimate mortality assumption. And for annuities, there will be 10% decrease or 10% improvement in the mortality as of best estimate mortality assumption, which is improving at a rate of 0.5% per annum. And in this case, we have to consider the type of business, whether it's an individual business, whether it's a group business, type of group business, that should be considered. Also, if there is any discretion related to charges, for example, discretion related to moderate charges in multi fund, subject to the constraint placed by the competition, needs to be considered. Similar thing apply for morbidity. However, for morbidity, there is only assurance product. There is no such annuity products for morbidity, which is the sickness, right? And that's why same concept will apply. It's just that it would only be 10%. increase in the morbidity rate. Moving on, there will be partial withdrawal, basically withdrawal, partial withdrawal, surrender, lapse, etc. And here, this is the only assumption that would have a 20% increase or decrease, because once again, withdrawal can impact the profitability or the reserve both ways. Right? It can even the increase might be sometimes beneficial, even the decrease might sometimes be beneficial, or vice versa. Right? So 20% increase or decrease in the best estimate assumption. Now this increase or decrease should be applicable for all the parameters, and it should consider any implicit or explicit guarantee, and it should also consider any policyholder reasonable expectation. And after moving on to the bonus will depend on the experience and the policyholder reasonable expectation. The actuary is supposed to pay in line with the asset share. However, it is up to the actuary to determine whether not paying in line with the asset shares would be relevant, and if it is as per the policyholder reasonable expectation. And finally, there will be expense. So expense is obviously increase in expenses harmful, so we'll consider the increase in expense. So 10% increase in the expense, with which is consistent with the current rate of inflation. So that would be the shocks. Now, in constructing the minimum adverse, so the adverse scenarios that we have kind of spoken about, these are the minimum scenarios that an opponent actually should consider if in his or her professional judgment. Once again, professional judgment. If it is, if he thinks that more scenarios need to be considered, then the opponent actually should consider more scenario. Also, we have seen the interest rate shocking, right? Interest rate shocking, and because these are the methods that we have kind of discussed, these are deterministic methods. Now, what this APS suggests is to use stochastic method, and we have already seen the stochastic method, which is kind of used for interest rate guarantees, right? There we don't keep mats. There we kind of or we keep mats by kind of allowing for the cost of guarantee, right? And we have seen the stochastic method. So instead of using deterministic method, because it will not create a distribution of outcomes, so that there will be no confidence interval that can be determined. Instead, it is better to switch on to stochastic method, and there a balance need to be stricken. Like for example, I mentioned that for mortality, morbidity, we usually do not use the stochastic method. However, for investment guarantee, which is outside the control of the company, there we kind of use the investment stochastic method. So that's it. And yeah, please answer the question. And if you like the content, please like, share, and subscribe. And see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.